All right, there's 1, 2, 3.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Gabe.
I think Crystal's on her way.
Yep. Is this sounding good?
Yep, got you.
And me as well.
Yes, we can hear you well, Matthew. Thank you. Yeah, I like that you came prepared with a full microphone. Yeah.
I was a journalism student in another lifetime, so quarantine was what I was built for. So.
Makes sense. As soon as we've got Crystal in here, I'll give you guys a quick brief and we'll get ready to go.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. All right. Just very quickly, this round is going to look very similar to how the last ones have looked for you guys. You'll have 10 minutes to brief, 10 minutes for then questions from the judges, and then 10 minutes for feedback. I will use the same signs, 5 minutes, 1 minute out of time, as you saw in the previous rounds. And you guys can begin as soon as you're ready.
Thank you. So there we go. So National Security Council, hello. My name is Matt Bowie, and I will be briefing you today with Gabriel Cash, Kristen Garfield, and Crystal Assenmacher. So we have 4 primary objectives based on the intel that we just received. We have received reports of a dirty bomb moving from North Korea, most likely to Pakistan, and it would probably be in use by Hindu nationalists. The second priority is plugging the vulnerabilities brought up by the AIS and the inventory system used by Seafarer. And that would require most likely an overhaul of maritime cybersecurity, though we do have some proposals for how to approach that and maybe cut the timing. And lastly, we are concerned with keeping financial markets, and the mitigating some of the economic damage that we could see coming out of these disruptions. Going into that, I'll hand it over to Gabe, I'm sorry, to talk a little bit more about how we should approach the dirty bomb.
Right, thank you guys. So our first course of action is going to be, since we don't know exactly where the dirty bomb is in its transit to potentially to Pakistan, we're going to alert the Indo-Pacific Command to restructure their the vessels, the ships, and just to be on the lookout for potential vessels, to continue collecting information through our DoD networks and trying to get basically a better picture of what this vessel might look like and what its capabilities might be in order to stop it if it's on its way to Pakistan. The second action we're going to take is to alert the Pakistani military of the potential incoming dirty bomb. As the report said, there's a political extremist group that has wealthy backers and ideology. So we think they may have some more hands and some more connections on deck on the way to Pakistan. So we want to be on the lookout for that. But definitely get in touch with ISI and as well as the Pakistani military, and just to make them aware of it, and also to make our resources available to them. I'll hand that off to Kristen.
All right, and with continuing with our efforts to gain a fuller picture of the situation, we're going to continue to use CIA, IMINT, and human resources, as well as continue our tasking of the NGA satellites over the North Korea-China border, and as well as the potentially the India-Pakistani border, just to make sure that we can track any suspicious movements. We'd also like to task the NSA to monitor signals intelligence. They can focus on the chat forums that have been mentioned in this in our intel so far. So chat forums like Darknode. There is evidence that some of these members of the chat forums are located outside the US. And additionally, as far as what we want to do to handle the threat to our borders, we'd like to enlist the United States Customs and Border Patrol, specifically their Air and Marine Operations Unit, and they're specifically designed to meet border and security challenges of this nature, and they do have the authority to interdict unlawful people, cargo, and investigate criminal networks and maintain domain awareness. So we want to leverage those resources, as well as the US Coast Guard, make sure that they're on alert. The other thing that we would like to do through Customs and Border Control is to use their cargo system's messaging system to send out alerts to incoming ships to make sure that they are aware of the situation that's going on and to take precaution and to keep everyone informed. And now I will hand it back to Matt.
Thank you. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we alluded to earlier with plugging some of the vulnerabilities and doing an overhaul on the maritime cybersecurity. So as we learned in some of the earlier cables, the Port of Osaka has been trying to come up with an alternative system for the AIS issues. And we are hoping that state or commerce can reach out to them to maybe kind of build on that system and see if we can accelerate that development and eventually use that as maybe an update for broad international usage. The other component of that in regards to the inventory is working with Seafair and their private security firm to kind of beef up more of their inventory management system, and to also kind of implement what they allude to would be a hard overhaul. I feel like with government support, especially internationally, it would be possible for us to kind of hammer out the broad solutions and provide more of the individualized tweaks that they were talking about that would be necessary to have each port effectively implement them. The other major aspect of this as well is calming the financial markets. As we have seen, there has been large drops across the stock market resulting from supply lines being disrupted and the uncertainty surrounding the situation. So to help combat that a little bit, we were hoping to give a public statement to name and shame at least North Korea. I think at this time, we are still debating on whether or not it would be advisable to also name the People's Militia. Giving them more publicity would only feed into their campaign, offer them more recruits. So at the very least, if we give the public some sense of what is happening, that will help at least calm the panic for right now. And we will suss out what other information would be pertinent as the situation develops and as we develop more intel. And with that, I'll pass it off to Crystal to talk about the attribution.
Sure, can everyone hear me? All right, so let's take a look at the attribution. With the new information that we've received, we are updating our assessment to a medium to high level of confidence that the threat actor responsible is North Korea or the non-state actor, the People's Militia. And to make that assessment, we generally look at these 4 indicators, and they are tradecraft capabilities, intent, and external sources. So what we've seen with our new information is that we have intercepted communications between the People's Militia discussing what they can, quote, take credit for, and stating that their initial targeting wasn't as accurate as they'd hoped. And furthermore, they said, quote, we only knew the first port of call for the ships we loaded the malware onto, end quote. So that further feeds into our assessment that the People's Militia is likely responsible for the incident. We also have a notification from CISA for an attribution of the actor threatening shipping attributes. They're attributing the threat to APT Bureau 121, which is affiliated with North Korea, a state-sponsored North Korean agency. We also have a news media article that reports that a hacktivist took credit for the leak of the Israeli cybersecurity firm Ipnos' malware suite that we've seen before. They have taken credit for that act. And last, we also have an NSA report to the National Security Council that states a North Korean operative eluded surveillance and boarded an unknown vessel confirmed to contain the dirty bomb components that we've been speaking of, and the nuclear program development documentation and other materials. So as you can see, with all of this information, we've been able to update our assessment, again, from a low to medium level of confidence or medium level of confidence now to high level of confidence with this additional information. It also has been sort of corroborating and almost essentially confirming what we've suspected, that there's the possibility of the People's Militia carrying out this attack and other actors, specifically North Korea, kind of piggybacking or kind of working together with them on this incident. So with that, we'd like to point out that we've mentioned some critical tactical actions that we are requesting you take, and we're provided you with some options. We'd be happy to open it up to you guys for some questions if you'd like to ask us about any of these more specifically. Thank you.
All right, judges, you have 10 minutes for Q&A.
Hi, this is Salila. I'll go first. So we talked a lot about the potential economic impacts and the need to assuage potential public concerns with a press statement that's being, I think, debated right now. To what extent is it advisable to maybe not, despite open source communication on this a little bit, to not really foment the North Korea narrative and like over state capabilities that they might have, which I think feeds into some of their geopolitical strategy when they chest thump like this, especially because the likelihood of containing what they're attempting to do based on either our actions or multilateral actions is potentially assured. What's the sort of media plan of engagement here, and are there other voices that we might want to seek to engage rather than using a presidential one or an executive branch one?
That is a very good point. We do want to provide some actor that the public can look to, something concrete, but we also acknowledge that by giving North Korea this platform, it does increase their leverage, at least perception-wise, on the world stage, and is correct. It's likely that if we do alert Pakistan, the ISI, their internal security is very well established. And so if this were to reach their soil, it is likely that they could intercept it or at least be able to track it. But I think that at the moment, we suggested North Korea because out of the two, blaming the People's Militia, I think just could raise their profile. North Korea is a known adversary already. So just alluding that they were responsible for at least some of the attack, we don't have to disclose all factors and the sophistication of what they have done. But it isn't, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch for the public to accept that North Korea was a part of a cyber attack that did some damage that could have caused what we are seeing right now. As evidenced by, like, to give a very extraneous example, the interview hack on Sony, the public is already very aware that they can do things like this. So I think it's a matter of how we would present that information and how much we are willing to highlight.
Yeah, going off that, I think there's going to be no easy press conference answer. One thing we're going to try to walk the fine line, obviously, between we don't want to introduce any like scare tactics. Definitely not going to go into the fact that the capabilities that North Korea is potentially shipping to Pakistan, but at the same time we have to let out some sort of message to curb the market, because the way this crash is continuing, not only is it affecting this season, the peak season, it'll also affect investors' confidence in further seasons and of our ability to curb such a threat. So I think we still need to hash out the details of that, but definitely need to make a statement.
Couple of quick questions. First of all, there was a reference earlier to not only tracking the movement toward Pakistan, but also tracking the India-Pakistan border. I'd like to ask what the reasoning was there. The second question is, there's a medium-high conference now that each of these three different threats, discrete threats, can be attributed to a specific actor. Can we have any confidence? Do we care to investigate further whether there is any additional value in understanding the interrelationship amongst the three separate actors? In other words, when we talk about medium-high confidence as to these were the actors, do we have the same level of confidence that they were or were not acting in any form of coordination?
That is a very good question, and I'll try to start at least from the back and then we'll work our way to the front. So in regard to whether or not there was coordination, I think that judging from the communications that we received, the People's Militia were surprised, at least as how the scope escalated with their attack, and also the additional effects that we have seen afterwards. So with the AIS systems, it seemed, at least from the limited communications that we have, that they were not expecting that to also result from what they've done. So I think that it is more likely, at least from what we've seen, that it was North Korea exploiting the situation to further their stance. It is a possibility that they are coordinating together still. Maybe there are communications that we have not seen. But from what we can assess with what's on hand, that seems to be the more likely scenario.
And then as to the second portion of that question, with regard to whether it is worth continuing the investigation into those links, I would say, despite the time and effort it takes, it is a worthy endeavor, because the more we know about proxy networks and the interrelationships, the better we can prepare ourselves for and against a future attack. And that will also play into things on a larger state to state level, such as economic sanctions, where those should be targeted and directed. So continuing investigation into who is behind and what their relationships are with each other is definitely worthwhile.
And to circle back to your, oh, sorry, Gabe, would you like to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to circle back to the question about patrolling the Pakistani border. Obviously, that's a very contentious area, and that's going to be very difficult for our personnel to get in and do that. I think our best steps here is to alert the Pakistanis, assure them, India as well, try to work with their forces. In our former suggestion, we had suggested working with China, at least for logistical for the other ports. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and say that we should not at least engage with China in this endeavor of tracking this dirty bomb. If you look at the document, the National Security Agency document, it states that the People's Republic of China's vessels at least knew, they might have either known the bomb was in transit, or they've gotten some sort of notice that something of that nature was happening. So I think it's fair to say that we cannot fully trust cooperation with China to lead to a successful stop of this bomb at this point.
And to add on to Gabe's point regarding at least the border, at least there was mention that it could possibly be targeted at Kashmir. If both sides of the border are aware of that, it might prevent an escalation of tensions, considering that they're pretty, they have come close to conflict in the past when there's any sort of flare-up. So giving them both a heads up at least will help undercut any suspicions between the two.
I have two somewhat related questions. The first one is, given the level of attribution that we've been talking about and the importance of knowing where all seagoing vessels are and the impacts on AIS, I haven't heard any use of cybercom and any action that they might present. So where do you see the DoD playing in your scenario? And the second one is, you talk about the need to do an industry-wide overhaul of the cybersecurity in the maritime system. That doesn't sound like a little, right? That's sort of like, let's drop a big task on the table. Who would lead that, and how long do you think such a thing would take?
Right. So going from the cybercom standpoint, it's absolutely going to be crucial for cybercom. Cybercom is actually probably going to be one of the lead players in this, working with the combatant commands like INDOPAC. We spoke about that before. It's going to be huge for them, especially with gathering intel, trying to coordinate or at least hop on China's networks and other networks as well. But yeah, they're definitely going to play a huge role. We just have to yet to establish that.
And in regards to the markets and overhauling the cybersecurity, I think that is definitely, and maybe we didn't articulate that very well in the policy brief, I believe that is more of a long-term objective that we're trying to do, but we can start with state, with commerce, with the Department of Transportation, reaching out and trying to coordinate that effort. And I believe, at least from what we've discussed, that Japan would at least be a great start to overhaul AIS, and Seafair and some of the other private sector entities that are on our soil. We can work through NIST, we can work with the FBI, we can kind of break down the problems and then rebuild a solution from there. So, but it would be a multi-agency effort, and that is going to take some time.
All right, is that it for judge questions? We have, yeah, we're running out of time anyway. So if the judges have none other questions, we'll move on to feedback. All right. Thank you all competitors. You guys did a great job. Judges, we now have 10 minutes for feedback.
I'm happy to go first again. So I thought that the organization here was really well done in terms of you had sort of a core moderator to organize how the presentation would go. You knew whom to hand it off to. You sort of divided your subject matter expertise. But at the same time, during the Q&A period, you were able to somewhat fluidly engage across the team in terms of providing insights and responses. Again, interested to hear what other feedback is, but you did a good job. But then when you had a question where you weren't sure whether or not you had briefed it, you said, well, maybe we didn't do a good job there. And I think there's no need to say something like that if you don't need to say something like that. You can say something like, we're exploring aspects of that further, and we are happy to provide you with the back brief once we have some more additional details, or something a little fuzzy that sort of acknowledges that it's an issue and that you're capable of addressing it. Because often you will have opportunity to come back with sort of an addendum of sorts to further flesh out what you want to say. I think that the discussion, the sort of Indo-Kashmiri discussion was well done, and sort of drawing out how that regional alliance or even the tension within South Asia can sort of help contain some of this. I thought that was really well articulated. But I think overall, the execution here and the sort of clean lines that were drawn, while at the same time being able to speak with some level of subject matter expertise, was well delivered. And again, don't cut yourself short if you don't need to. Others will be more than happy to do that for you in your careers.
I thought this team did an excellent job. You were really clear. I thoroughly understood. There was one thing up front that I did not understand, because I'm pretty sure that you said there's 4 issues here, and then you described 3. But I understood what the 3 were, and I quickly put to the side, well, what was the 4th? And just focused on what you had to say next. And I really appreciated that you brought that international understanding and exploration into the discussion, because obviously we're not the only country involved here. This is a pretty big deal. I did want to see more and hear more about how we know with whom to communicate which forms of message. And that is both inside the United States amongst the public sector and the relevant implicated private sector, as well as in the international arena, both on the sort of non-governmental self-governing leverage points that we have in multiple organizations around the globe, as well as government to government beyond the military, but more into the intelligence realm.
Yeah, so I'm gonna echo a couple of pieces here. I really appreciated, like Emily, you said 4 and went to 3, but I went right past that pretty early on as well. It's always a good idea when you're doing this to start with, here's the objective. A fine, and this is like really a super fine point. We care about the dirty bomb. That was your policy objective number 1, right? Or focus area number 1. But what outcome are you trying to accomplish? That finer second part of that sentence would have made it even better, right? That's just like catnip in it. You did great. So these are really, like I said, this is fine point tuning that's here. When you went to talking about naming and shaming North Korea, we had to pull out at a later point, what's the possible, is that really a good idea? What's the trade for doing that? You understood the issue, but you put out there something fairly inflammatory early on. And in a National Security Council meeting, somebody is going to jump on that. So watch using inflammatory comments early, and then having to walk them back at a later point in time as well. I really appreciated that you captured the threat to U.S. borders and really had do that. So it's clear that you had thought about this issue domestically and internationally and in multidimensional formats. The other thing that I felt a little kludgy was I liked how you talked about attribution. I liked how you were clear about what it was, but then I was left feeling like, and so what, right? Normally when you attribute something, when you have that level of attribution, it's to accomplish an objective. So I need this level of attribution so that I can invoke this law, or so that I can take this sanction, or that I can execute this operation. And so where it was staged in your presentation left me a little bit, I just wanted one more step of, and because we have at this high level for each of these players, we're going to take these actions, or it supports this earlier policy activity. Now, having said all of that, this is real, like I said, this is fine tuning of a really solid presentation.
I would agree. Echo, the good thing about going last and giving responses is that everyone else has covered everything. So ditto to, Salila, Emily, and Bobbie. My being from industry, and this is by no means a knock on your presentation at all, because this is sort of a geopolitical situation, but private industry tends to move these things forward quite a bit in terms of commerce. So it would have been interesting to hear more of how would you engage with the private sector, especially on helping to move, for example, revamping the entire shipping software platform. So that would have been interesting to sort of tie that in there. And that's it. Good job, guys.
All right, judges, is that the rest of your feedback? We have we have 2 minutes. If any of the competitors would like to ask any questions of the judges before we move on.
I'd just like to say thank you guys so much for that feedback. This is, I don't know, I might be speaking for myself, but I've never been thrown into a situation like that, such fast pace and intensity. So I appreciate your guys' feedback constructively, and also relating it to real world, like, how people will perceive this in a true National Security Council meeting. So we really appreciate that.
All right, competitors, thank you so much. You did a great job. Congratulations for making it this far. If all of you could please drop off of this meeting now. Have a good day, and hopefully we'll hear from you in a couple of, I guess, an hour or two when we get to the finalist announcements. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.